It's Friday, so let's answer some questions from the mailbag.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That is at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, well, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, some co-hosting, and some producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use code all lowercase LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. Well, the goal today is to get through every single question that we have, but we do have a lot coming both from YouTube and from Twitter. And for the first time since taking over this podcast and doing Mailbag Fridays, I'm going to start it off with the questions over on YouTube. So if I don't get to your question on Twitter, I do apologize. I'll try to get back to it in a timely manner. But if I don't, just direct message me and I'll answer to it directly to whoever is going to be sending it. So let's start it off with question number one. This comes from Colson. Why is Adam Frazier still on the team? I think I've gotten this more often than not in terms of a roster construction of a player that, Royals fans don't want to see out there anymore. I just believe that Adam Frazier's out there because A, he can play multiple positions, and B, he's a lefty that offsets Garrett Hampson as a righty. They've been there all season long, whether it be a team camaraderie thing, a leadership thing, or just liking to have this guy around the clubhouse. Adam Frazier has no signs of going anywhere. I don't think that they are going to outright DFA him unless there would be a roster move to be made, bringing in Ahmed Rosario or bringing in Gio Urshela, who was DFA'd by the Tigers today. But they're right-handed bats, so I think Garrett Hampson would have more of a chance to be DFA'd than Adam Frazier would. So if you're expecting him to be released or anything like that, I wouldn't expect it anytime soon. Next one comes from Grant. When do you think the Royals are going to get a big series win or sweep over a winning team? Looking back against the plus 500 teams, they lost the series against the Diamondbacks, the Cubs, the Red Sox at home, split against St. Louis. Just feels like forever since they had a big series win against a big team. Still fine with them getting into the playoffs off of beating up on bad teams, but just want them to win a big one as a moral victory at this point. It's getting discouraging. Love the podcast. Well, thank you for the kind words, Grant. And I think that's everybody's hope, right? That you want to see this team elevate to the next level in these final 40 games where they're not just beating up on the White Sox or against the Angels or against the Tigers. Though the Tigers are nearing 500, so I don't consider them to be that bad of a baseball team. But you're right on the Red Sox and the Cubs. Well, the Cubs were actually sub 500, but the Diamondbacks as well. They have a big test against Cincinnati coming up in about an hour or so, and the Reds aren't over 500, but they're hovering right around there, and they're a difficult team to take down when playing in a Great American Ballpark, I think, because that team is built to play at Great American Ballpark. I think that a series you can eyeball is either the one against Cleveland or Minnesota at home. I would love to say Phillies next weekend because the Phillies have been really bad in the second half. That might be the closest one I can look at for beating a really good team. Even though Philly struggled in the second half, record-wise and talent-wise, they're unbelievable. They're still a National League favorite, or one of the National League favorites, in my opinion. But Cincinnati, that doesn't really count as a top contending team. The Angels certainly don't. So I'll bookmark that Philly series because of how they've played in the second half, and that game being at Kauffman Stadium over the weekend. Would expect some really big crowds for those three games. But good question there from Grant. Next one here comes from, let's see if this thing can load pretty quickly. This one comes from Jason. Bobby has been so amazing this season, and I hate to criticize him, but what in the world has happened to his base stealing ability? Caught for the 12th time. What is going on, and do we need to be concerned with this? I think that's something that a lot of people are starting to wonder because he's so fast and because he was so successful in stealing a lot of bags last year. I think it's more so that pitchers are far more concerned with him now over there, where he's getting on base so many times that him stealing bags is kind of being put at the front of a pitcher's focus. I think that, when you see Bobby Witt Jr. get on base, you would think more often than not he's going to try to steal second base. Therefore, they're using slide steps, they're pitching out, they're picking over a few times. It just makes it a little bit more complicated to get all the way to second base without either a throw or to beat the tag or just to have something go your way, like the ball being in the dirt and there's no throw at all. So to me, I think he's on base more. They're paying more attention to him. They always knew about the elite speed last year, but he wasn't on base as much as he is this year. So I think for him, just being a little bit smarter, not being overly aggressive because they don't need him to. It's not like the Royals are trying to win a lot of games 2-1, 3-2. They've got guys that can drive him in with a gapper or just moving him from second to third to home. They've got a much better equipped offense this year than they had to last year. But still, I think it is alarming that he gets thrown out so often for a guy his speed. I mean, we're going to have to deal with Ellie De La Cruz this weekend and watching him swipe a lot of bags if he gets on base because nobody can throw him out. But I'm not sure I'm overly concerned to the point where you need to have a sit-down meeting with him because he's hitting 350. I know base running is a part of it, but I would still trust him 10 out of 10 times to take a base whenever he wants to. Next question, it comes from, let's see here. I believe I had one more from YouTube. Yeah, this one comes from DJ Mack. Maikel Garcia is a shortstop on any other team since his value would be so high at short on any other team, and he hasn't been able to hit leadoff. Does he get traded this offseason or down the road? I don't think his value will be as high as a trade piece because the offense hasn't come around just yet. And I think the Royals really believe there's something there. And because the third base depth in the system isn't as strong right now, I think if they had somebody that was up and coming, you could make that transition. But right now, there's nobody that I believe is pounding on the door. I mean, it's Nick Lofton in AAA, and then it's Maikel Garcia at the big league level. They traded Caden Wallace away. So there's nobody that I think can take over that spot. And they would like to build around Maikel Garcia and put him into this young core. And hopefully the bat comes around there because I still believe there's some underlying data that can prove that he's going to be a good hitter at the big league level. But right now, I think it's just, dealing with his first full year at the big league level. He got a lot of time last year, but there wasn't much of a book on him. Now there is, and it's about adjusting next year. And I think the Royals will hope for him to have a much better year in 2025 than he has in 2024. Well, now we're going to quickly switch over to Twitter for the final 2 minutes of segment number 1, because I did want to kick things off with YouTube because I don't feel like I always get to every single YouTube question, or if somebody asks them pretty early on in the week, I feel bad that I don't go back and actually answer those questions. But we got 30 or so to get to, so we'll see if we can get to all of them here before we wrap up Friday's edition. This one comes from Eric. Are there any guys still in AAA you could see getting a shot without injuries to the current 26-man roster? Tyler Gentry, Noah Cameron, maybe Nick Lofton again. I'm looking to September and the two call-ups there, unless there was an injury. I don't see anybody like a Noah Cameron getting called up. Evan Sisk could have a chance because of how good he's been out of the bullpen, but I think Alec Marsh takes one of those roster spots in the September call-ups, and I'd guess that Nick Lofton takes the other. I don't know if they want to put a rookie up on a wild card chase in September unless they truly believe that guy can make a serious impact. I love what Tyler Gentry's been doing, but I don't see them putting Tyler Gentry in the lineup for the final 40 days unless they felt like he was a severe upgrade over Hunter Renfroe or Kyle Isbell or MJ Melendez. And at this point in the season, I don't believe that to be the case. Jared asked, Paul DeJong is a former shortstop. Why can't he slide to second when Massey isn't playing so we can keep Maikel at third and keep Frazier away from the field of play? I mean, we discussed this a little bit yesterday, or it might have been Wednesday's episode about Paul DeJong. I don't see him being an everyday player. I think he's going to play 2 to 3 times a week, depending on the matchup. He's got that funky reverse split when facing righties against lefties. But to me, I think this is more so about rotating Michael Massey, Maikel Garcia, and Paul DeJong a little bit. I don't think that all 3 of those guys are going to be 7-day-a-week players, because I think there's really only 3 guys, in my opinion, that are 7-day-a-week players, and that is Bobby, that is Vinny, that is Sally. We see Renfroe play a lot. We see Isbell play a lot. But still, some of those guys get more off days than the rest. So for, DeJong, I think it's because he's far more comfortable at third and hasn't played second base that much of late. He is a shortstop, but they're not moving Bobby Witt Jr. And with Massey's back, I think that they're just trying to get this lineup into a bit of a rhythm with playing with different guys at second and third base, whether that be DeYoung, whether that be Massey, or whether that be Maikel Garcia. We're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, still plenty more questions to get into from the mailbag. Next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first sponsor in Liquid IV. We've been so happy to show them some love all week long because I'm a big fan of Liquid IV. I love to drink water, but I love it even more when I can pour a packet of Liquid IV into it. I was telling you last night about a beer league softball game. It's 90,000 degrees here with humidity in Kansas City. So when you get back to your house, you need to be able to hydrate, but maybe you don't want to pound like 4 or 5 bottles of water, or you don't have 4 or 5 bottles, or maybe you're somebody that has a Stanley and you don't like refilling it all the time. Take a bottle of water, take a Stanley, put the Liquid IV in, and you'll be hydrated for the rest of the evening or the rest of the day because it has that much of a beneficial value to it, nutrients, whatever you want to call it. I love Liquid IVs. They really taste good. There's plenty of different flavors out there, and I can't get enough of it. I almost every single day put a Liquid IV into my bottled water. So here's what you need to do. You need to go to liquidiv.com and use code MLB at checkout to get 20% off your first order. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code MLB at liquidiv.com. Let's hop back over to Twitter and get into the next set of questions. It looks like the next one here comes from, I apologize, I've been having some trouble with things loading here on my phone and on the computer during this episode. So bear with me here as I'm continuing to stall. This one comes from Token Sports. Will the Royals win the Central? A very low percentage they do. It would take an absolute and utter collapse from Cleveland and from Minnesota for the Royals to do that. It's not they are mathematically eliminated or it's a 0% chance. It's just not one I consider to be that likely at this point. I mean, Cleveland will see the Royals a handful of times, so the Royals could gain ground themselves. But with the way the schedule is lined up for the Royals, I think the focus needs to be far more shifted on the wild card race than the division race. If they start really getting a cushion in the wild card race, maybe we can turn our attention back toward the Central. But right now, I'm going to say no, they do not win the American League Central. Joe asks, is it time to see more Paul DeYoung and less Maikel Garcia? Kind of piggybacking after what we said to one of the questions in the first segment, I don't see Paul DeYoung being an everyday player. I don't think that he is somebody you just run out there every single day. The White Sox did that this year because they had to, and he was a guy that ran into more than a few home runs. He's already at 20 this year, and that's top 5 on the team. But offensively, he's just not a guy that if you gave him the rest of the at-bats at third base or second base, he's going to give you what you think he's going to give you. And the Royals love Massey's defense at second. They love Maikel Garcia's defense at third. And I do think that Maikel Garcia is somebody that they want to put out there more than Paul DeYoung. But Paul DeYoung is still going to be there plenty of times. He's in the lineup tonight in Game 1 against Cincinnati. And I think that 2 to 3 times a week is more than fair to play Paul DeYoung. But I understand coming off his 3-hit performance, being a triple shy of the cycle against the Twins on Wednesday, that you would think that because Garcia has been slumping a little bit. MJ Melendez Enthusiast asked, what would be your plan of attack for the 28-man roster come September 1st? Yeah, I kind of touched on this a little bit. Not your fault. Just somebody else asked that question. I was able to get to it first. But it's going to be, in my opinion, Alec Marsh and Nick Lofton. You bring up one pitcher, you bring up one bat, and both those guys had significant amount of playing time in Kansas City this year. Next one comes from Max. Does Waka opt in or opt out of his contract in the offseason? And what do you think the rotation will look like next year with Kyle Wright and a healthy Bubic? I do think Michael Waka opts in because with the money he'll be making, which if I'm not mistaken, it's about 16-ish million. I think it was a $32 million deal over 2 years with that player option. I think it's in the ballpark of 16 million. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I do think he opts back in because I believe that's what he's worth. I'm not sure if he hit the market that he is going to be getting more than 16 million. On top of that, he's been the number 3 in the rotation. So you're not going to pay a number 3 20 million, especially not Michael Waka, who's over the age of 30 at this point. And the starting pitching market was kind of weird this past year. It was slow moving. Marcus Stroman didn't sign for a while, and then the Yankees were able to get him. I think Walker's happy here. I think he likes the collection of guys, and I expect him to be back. So it'll be Cole Reagans, Lugo, Walker. I bet Chris Bubich does get a crack into that rotation, and then I'd probably say Brady Singer if they had some form of a deal done to bring him back. If not, I would look into maybe a cheap one-year deal that you can plug in as your number 4, your number 5 guy. But good question there from Max, because I know a lot more people are starting to think about Michael Wacha and that opt-in or opt-out come off season time. MIZ123 fan 16 asks, the Royals have a golden opportunity to get some breathing room over the next 6 games, 3 against the Reds, 3 against the Angels. The Red Sox have Orioles, Astros. How crucial are these 6 games? I love that you bring this up because we talked about it last night. It is a perfect opportunity for the Royals to bury the Red Sox a little bit. Then the focus becomes on Seattle, because if Boston goes in and loses 3 of 4 to Baltimore and loses 2 of 3 to the Astros, and the Royals win a series against Cincinnati, and let's say in a perfect scenario sweep the Angels, man, you're looking at a 5, 6, 6.5 game cushion, and you don't see the Red Sox again. You don't see Seattle again. So it's just about stacking wins at that point, which is what Vinny Pasquantino said last week. Just keep stacking wins. It doesn't matter who they come against. But yes, this is a golden opportunity. I would say very crucial because of that gauntlet of games that's coming up. JC Retro Athletics asks, why is Alec Marsh not with the Royals for a long relief option? I think because they wanted to get him in that hybrid role, and he had been starting all season long. So to shorten those outings, much easier to do in Omaha than in Kansas City. So when September rolls around, I think he'll come back up, might start a few games, might be the opener for somebody, or might be that long relief option. But it was more so about transitioning him from the length that he had, throwing 90 to 100 pitches, to shrinking that to about 40 to 50 to 60 pitches on any given outing down in Omaha. Travis asks, why does Bobby Wood Jr. get picked off and thrown out so much on the base paths? Again, another question that we touched on a little bit in the first segment. I think he's on base a lot more, and I think he's being focused on even more so than he was last year. But even last year, he got thrown out a handful of times. I think he's still a phenomenal base runner, but when you're dealing with guys picking over, guys pitching out, guys sidestepping constantly, and you're an aggressive base runner, you're going to run into issues like that. But I think he needs to clean it up before you get closer and closer to the end of the season, because if you get into the playoffs, you want to have that weapon of a guy that can always get on base and always put himself into scoring position. Jason asked, it's not a question, but Royals better be ready in the Red Series because they are tougher than the record shows. Going to be a tough one. Absolutely agree with that. This Reds team is very sneaky. They're very good. Jeff Carr does fantastic work over at Lockdown Reds. He's one of the main people that was able to introduce me to doing this podcast, so I really respect him. That is a team that can beat up on you if you're not careful. That ballpark, in my opinion, is built for them. They've got a lot of power there. It's going to be a tough lineup to navigate, and the Royals won't have Lugo or Reagans going into the series. So, yes, they can't come out flat at any point in this 3-game set. This one, it comes from Royals and Chiefs. What are some bullpen arms you would want for next year? Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't had the chance really to dive into all the free agents for 2025. I was going to start doing that at the beginning of September, and what's funny is I had thought going into the year, well, by September, I'm probably going to have to start looking toward the offseason. But no, we are going to have this thing rolling about playoffs and playoffs and playoffs all the way up until the end of September, in my opinion. But I'm looking on the fly here about some relief pitching options that are going to be 2025 free agents. I mean, the guy they'll see tonight, Nick Martinez, kind of a bit of a hybrid between a starter and reliever. He's supposed to be a free agent if he declines that player option. You have somebody like a Ross Stripling who could transition to that role. Another an unrestricted free agent. I mean, you could always bring back Aroldis Chapman. You could look into Daniel Bard, though he's dealt with injuries. Matt Moore was a guy I really liked last offseason. He's going to be an unrestricted free agent. Alex Wood, another funky throwing left-hander. Blake Trinan, local ties to Kansas City. I think he'd be fantastic. Joe Kelly, always loved Joe Kelly and the kind of flair that he showed on the mound. I'm not sure if he'd be a perfect fit in Kansas City, but if there is one guy that they could, I think, stabilize their bullpen with, I think it's Paul Sewald in Arizona. Now, Paul Sewald's the closer in Arizona, and he's had some blown saves in the second half, but last year in the playoffs, phenomenal. Was great to start the year. I think it would be worth looking into to pair him with a Lucas Ursig, who you know is going to be back, and Hunter Harvey. and John Schreiber. And I would love to see the Royals go out there and get a closer. Maybe Lucas Erceg is the closer, but if you want Lucas Erceg to be the closer, go get somebody who is a premier setup man and really stabilize the back end of the bullpen. So top of the list, just going off the fly here, I think Paul Sewald would be a great addition for the Royals because he is supposed to be an unrestricted free agent, unless Spotrac is pulling my leg here and they're wrong with all these guys that are not supposed to be free agents. But those were a couple of the names that just popped up on my list. Blake Trinan would make a lot of sense because of the local ties as well. We're going to take our final break of the show. But before we do that, thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On MLB podcast. Host Pat Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, is here daily to provide national expertise with his trademark humor to help you get ready for the MLB playoffs here in the dog days of summer. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day on Locked On MLB, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we come back, we'll wrap up the week with our mailbag questions next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. We do have one more sponsor to give a shout out to, and it is our title sponsor in PrizePicks. Now, with PrizePicks, there really is a perfect opportunity for you with baseball winding down, football about to kick things back up, and you can head over to PrizePicks, download that app, and start winning some money today because you can pick something like a couple of stat projections, right? You want to take the over on some point totals. With football coming around the corner, you're talking about receiving yards, rushing yards, passing yards, all that stuff. But for baseball, right, you can talk about hits in a game. You can pair a couple players together. It's really fun over at PrizePicks. And I got a couple of buddies that love to use that app. And almost every single night before there's a game, they want to get more invested into it. PrizePicks is where they're going to head over to. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. That is Locked On MLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. Go get started today with PrizePicks. Well, I don't know if we're going to be able to get to every single question, so I apologize. I'll answer these as quickly as I can, but also give some thought and some meaning behind some of my answers. This one comes from Brohamed Ali. Love that username, by the way. Do you think Carlos Hernandez should be back in the bullpen mix? I'm going to go no on that. I think he's had his chances. I don't think his fastball, even though it runs up 98, 99, 100, it's straight. It's very hittable, and he's been very hittable his entire career. And what do the Royals do with Nelson Velasquez? I don't think he's doing enough in Omaha to get another crack at the big league level. Maybe instead of Nick Lofton, they would call Nelson Velasquez up to give them some extra power off the bench because Nick Lofton was really struggling offensively. But I think they want somebody who's better defensively, not really playing every single day, and more so as a defensive replacement than they would want a power bat off the bench. Because to that point, it's Paul DeJong. Paul DeJong would be the power bat off the bench for the Royals in September. This one comes from Carl, not a mailbag question, but you live in KC. So how do you watch the games, Jack Valley Sports app? I do. So I have YouTube TV. Of course, they don't have a deal with that, so that's really unfortunate. But I do go through the Valley Sports app, and I've had my fair share of issues, as I know everybody else has. But if I'm not at the games and I'm just in the comforts of my own home, I am going through my Roku and using the Valley Sports app. But I know a lot of people have always asked me how I watch the games. Yep, it is the subscription through Valley, and I use the app. I do not have cable. Tom asked, I'm a UK Royal fan, limited mostly to next day highlights as games are through the night here. What are the areas that will potentially stop us from making the playoffs? Leadoff, bullpen, difficulty of remaining schedule. It's been a great ride so far this year. Well, love seeing the out of country love, I should say, for the Royals. We've had that a couple of times in the past, but Tom, if I can answer your question, I'm just going to say yes. I think that, the leadoff spot could have its own issues. The bullpen and blowing games late could be an issue. I think the rotation running out of gas could be an issue, and just the tough schedule. So you put those issues together, rotation on fumes, bullpen blowing games, and a tough schedule, that's going to prevent them from getting into the playoffs. The good thing for them is they've got a nearly 3-game lead in the wild card race, and the teams that are chasing them are dealing with their issues of their own. Boston can't close out any game. Seattle's now struggling with their bullpen, and they can't hit. Boston's got an incredibly tough schedule. So these 3 teams all have their set of issues, and I think the Royals might be able to pull through with a higher chance than those other 2 teams can. This one comes from Touch. I think that's what we'll go with. I apologize if I mispronounced that. Why on earth does Frazier keep getting opportunities? That was one of our first questions today. Left-handed bat, plays multiple positions, and he can hit leadoff from time to time. Not well, but they like the fact that he's played multiple positions. He's an experienced veteran, and there's nobody in the minor leagues really that can take his spot, and I think do better than what Adam Frazier's given you. So I do apologize to all the people that want Adam Frazier off the team because I don't think he's going anywhere for the time being. Ben asked, what's the confidence level on Brady Singer on a scale of 1 to 10? Good question here. I think about a 6. I think when he faces a bad team, you can get a good version of Brady Singer. If he's on the road and facing a good team, I don't think he's going to pitch well. If he's facing a good team at home, I think he can give you 5 innings. 5 innings, a 1-run or 2-run ball. Also depends on how many lefties are in that lineup. So for that, I got to get that confidence level, 5 or a 6 right now. Kind of a toss-up for me. Bob asks, should the Royals look into a 6-man rotation with Lugo's shakiness and the uncertainties of him and Reagan's going deep into the season? I'm not really worried about Reagan's at this point because of how he looked against Minnesota. For Lugo, I am worried because of that, age factor. He's 34. He's never thrown this many innings before. And the Royals might have that ability in September with Alec Marsh coming back up with the 28-man roster, expanding it by 2 spots. So I would look into it. I don't want to move Lorenzen out of the rotation, and maybe Alec Marsh in a 3 to 4 inning role could thrive there. And it just gives an extra day for everybody out there to make sure that they're not running out of gas or completely on empty by the time the season ends. Crankin asks, leadoff position needs to be addressed, doesn't it? Isbell a candidate? Don't think Kyle Isbell is going to be a candidate. I think they like him in the 9-hole, the second leadoff spot, as they may call it from time to time. But Kyle Isbell, to me, is somebody you just don't mess with. When he's hitting well, keep him in the 9 spot. You don't need to put extra pressure on him. To me, the options are going to be Maikel Garcia, Michael Massey, Adam Frazier, MJ Melendez if they really wanted to get crazy. But other than that, I think that's who it's going to be. Brody asks, the Royals are going to most likely lose $30 million in salary since Lyles, Dozier, and Walker will be off the books. Would you use some of the extra money to make a push at Chapman or Bregman? Feels like we could get Matt Chapman on a 5-year, $150 million deal. Matt Chapman has been very good this year for the Giants, and I don't know if I would go for Bregman. Would much rather go for Chapman. I think they're going to have Michael Walker back, so you add his money back to that point. But you look at Dozier and Lyles being off the book, I think they will make a push for somebody, whether it be an outfield bat or a third baseman, to just give them that extra power to add alongside Bobby, Vinny, and Salvi. Because if Maikel Garcia isn't going to be the guy that can play every single day, I would love to see them go after somebody like Matt Chapman because I think that would round out that infield very, very nicely. Waka Season asks, if the Royals stay on course and finish well over 500 this season, could they be in play for some bigger free agent names this offseason? I know it's still small market money, but would there be in a world in which we are in on guys like Corbin Burns and Blake Snell, assuming Blake Snell opts out of his deal in San Francisco? I think that they're going to spend some money, but they're not going to go way over the top because I think they want to disperse it out a little bit. I don't think they're going to be giving somebody a 7-year deal or an 8-year deal or a 5-year deal. 5-year deal is possible because we talked about that with Brody's question for Matt Chapman. But to me, I do think that, he's somebody you might try to get on a 3-year deal or maybe even a 2-year deal with more money involved. I think they're going to spend. I think that last offseason wasn't a fluke. I think John Sherman wants to invest money. And if the Royals come off a year in which they're making the postseason, they're going to want to go a little bit further than that next year. And that will require some spending. This one comes from Sam. Thoughts on signing Amed Rosario? Obviously, there have been struggles in the leadoff spot. He hit 2-0 in Cleveland last year. Walk to strikeout ratio is alarming, but still manages to get on base at a good enough clip. Just thought it was an interesting opportunity. I think it's a great outlet to look into, but the fact that we haven't heard anything and nobody's claimed him in 2 days makes me think that he's not really a high-value guy for anybody out there. And the Dodgers are willing to cut bait from him basically 10 days after they had traded for him, it felt like. So to me, if you wanted to upgrade over Garrett Hampson, sure. I just don't think the Royals at this point are going to be making a move. But I would love to be wrong on something like that. This one comes from KC Sports Center. Why do we not call up Evan Sisk from AAA? He's been amazing this year. Yeah, I kind of put him in the same boat as Walter Pennington. And by the way, he's doing great in Texas, so good for him. I just don't know if they want to put that pressure on a rookie to pitch out of the bullpen in the playoff race. Evan Sisk is more of a seasoned prospect. I think he's almost 28 years old. He gives a funky arm angle, but there's something there that maybe they're waiting to see a little bit more of before they would make a move, because right now they got Will Smith, Angel Serpa, Chris Bubich, Sam Long in the bullpen. And that's just too many lefties. And I don't see them moving on from anybody. If they were, it'd be Angel Serpa. But Angel Serpa is more so in a long relief role at this point and not really a high leverage role. All right, we're going to get to, I think, just one more question here. I apologize to everybody else who sent in questions. So I'll try to answer them just directly on Twitter because we ran out of time. This one comes from Spider-Man. Why does the front office hate John Rave? John Rave's been good in Omaha, but I just urge you to look at, what Drew Waters and CJ Alexander did in Omaha. Just because you hit well in AAA doesn't mean you're going to hit well at the big league level, and the outfield's crowded right now in Kansas City. So John Rave may get his chance next year, but as for this year, I just don't see any drastic moves being made to the roster unless there would be an injury. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. Now go check out Locked On MLB. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day. You can find the link to Locked On MLB in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we return on Monday, we'll have a full breakdown of this Red Series and look ahead to the Los Angeles Angels. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.